How's everyone doing today? Good, awesome. Well, hopefully I don't make anyone too tired. Last time I did this, I was right before lunch. That's never a fun place to be. I'm glad there's a little bit of a buffer. So today we're going to be talking about scaling sales enablement. I'm a product marketer, and so one of my favorite things to do is tell stories. And so let's start there. And probably one of the proudest and weirdest moments that I've ever had was the day that somebody thought I was a Slack chatbot. Yes, a Slack chatbot. Let me play some context for you here. So we were at our sales kickoff. We are a global company. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. Our sellers were in from all over the world, and it's happy hour. Drinks are flowing. People are getting boozy. You know how sales kickoffs go. And one of our sellers from the Netherlands runs across the room and grabs me by the shoulders. And he shakes me and he's like, "You're Sapphire." I was like, "I am Sapphire." And he was like, "You're real." I was like, "I'm real." And he was like, "I thought you were a Slack chat bot." And the reason that he thought I was a Slack chat bot is because I'm remote. I'm always sending messages to the sales team. I really want to make a connection with them, so I'm sending messages at all times of the day. And we also use Seismic for sales enablement. So, wrong way. So you could see how Sapphire, the Seismic Slack chatbot, sounds like a really good branded chatbot. I was really, really weirded out by this, I'm not gonna lie. But I took some time to think about it and actually made me really, really proud. Because one of the things that I think about is sales is actually my customer, right? I am selling them a brand and a product of sales enablement. And when you think about a chatbot's attributes, they're designed to act like a human, like the most helpful human you could find. And when I thought about that, hey, that is not really a bad place for me to be. So I'll talk a little bit more about how we got there. But a little bit about me. My name is Sapphire, obviously. I'm a senior product marketing manager at a company called Pluralsight. We sell a tech skills platform that helps individuals and businesses eliminate the skills gaps in their technology organization. I am remote, so I'm based in Los Angeles. Our company is headquartered in Salt Lake, but we have offices in Boston, Dublin, and one opening in Sydney. And then I love product marketing. It is such a passion of mine. I really love that it's art and science, and you really have to have a lot of data skills and empathy to tell good stories. So let's have some reals talk. Why are you here today, right? Everyone knows you need enablement. It improves the performance of your sales organization and your organization at large. But what are some of the pain points you're feeling? It might be, hey, we need a formal enablement function, right? Nobody really knows what we do. I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing, or I'm just doing all the things to get it done. We need some sort of formalization and standardization. It might be, hey, I need to get that seller and that buyer the right tool, right content, right time, right place, right? You need to make sure you have that targeting. And maybe, hey, we're not able to easily onboard sellers or coach them. We're not actually able to drive that right behavior change. And it could be just around measuring the ROI, right? Maybe you stood something up, maybe you're trying to stand something up, and you need to figure out what business impact looks like. I'm sure if I won't ask you to do this, but if I asked you to raise your hand, you'd have something around this. So those are some of the pain points that kind of come to mind. And so one of the things I want to set the vision on is just a little bit about my background and kind of where I've come from. And so when about 5 years ago, I joined a company called Patient Co. It is a healthcare IT startup based in Atlanta. Really fantastic company. I was their first product marketing hire, and I came on board ready to hit the ground running. And what ended up happening was it's a very product-focused company. There's very little resources for marketing and sales. And they didn't really know what product marketing was. They thought they wanted a product marketer. They wanted a content marketer. They had just hired a bunch of 5 people in sales, but it was from 1 to 5 at the time. And so I tried to create this program, and it just didn't work. I don't know why it didn't work. I can't stand up here and talk about it, but I felt like such a failure in that moment of I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't have a sales background. I've never led enablement initiatives. So it was very frustrating for me. And I focused more on the product side at that organization. And then about 3 years ago, I joined Pluralsight, as I mentioned. A little bit of context on the organization when I joined. We were super high growth. We had 40% year-over-year growth, and we actually grew by 50% in the B2B enterprise space. We were tackling new global markets with this new B2B enterprise motion. There was a new sales process. So, we had this old one. We were introducing new value-based selling. And then all of this was led by new teams. There was a new CMO. There was a new CRO that had just started. There was a new sales training team. There was new product marketing. So everything was new. And it was all based on this foundation of like disparate systems and inconsistency. And I'm not talking just about like data. I'm talking about like messaging, everything. Like nothing was in one place and nothing was the same. So when I joined, I knew that I was like, sales enablement is a big need in this organization. And I want to figure it out this time. So fast forward to now, 3 years later, and what have we been able to do? And I'll talk a little bit about how we've gotten here. For the product marketing side, again, I'm on the product marketing side, so that's kind of where my context is. But we do partner with our formerly sales training, now sales enablement team. We've built this trusted brand internally. We have consistency and we're proactive in our approach. We have better collaboration across all of our functional departments. We're able to actually triage pain points, and we're able to attribute impact. In terms of sales, some of the big wins have been they're actually able to communicate that value and win against the competition. They're moving faster, both from an onboarding standpoint to those who've already been on board, and they're able to hit those performance measures that we put in place for them. And the last thing, as our company, in the 3 years I've been there, we went public, which was pretty awesome. We increased our revenue, we've improved efficiency, and we've expanded globally. So as we were kind of as I joined the company 3 years ago, and I knew all this context of new, basically is what I put it down to. I knew we needed some standardization, otherwise we'd flounder, right? Like I need some sort of process, whatever it is, to work through this. Otherwise, we're going to fail, and that could mean we lose revenue. And so I thought to myself, how can I create some sort of process or framework that is going to allow me to move really quickly, but isn't going to be like super specific to one tool or like overall program. Like I needed something that was flexible to apply to an overall program and a specific work stream. And so I created a framework. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And with this framework, I worked with my team across product marketing and sales training at the time, and we used our go-to-market skills. This is really where I started to think, okay, if I just use what I know about working for customers, right? If I understand how to do discovery, if I understand how to build a product, work with product teams to build a product for customers, if I put myself in this mindset, like I probably already have all the skills I need baseline, and then I can improve from there. So it's just kind of this new life for me, going from like, I've totally failed at this thing to like, hey, I probably can do this. I just need a little bit more support. So this is my framework. This is not revolutionary. I don't want you to think I'm coming up here and giving you some magic pill. If you've worked with product development teams, it probably feels really similar to what they've created in terms of, agile and iterative processes. The reason why I like to show it in this context is because if you are on the product marketing side, again, you're used to this kind of process working with product teams, so it can really help. If you are in the sales enablement side, this is how a lot of product marketers are thinking. I know it's like, what is that product marketer thinking? Is she crazy? Is she stupid? I don't know. I think both sometimes. But this is where we're at. So in terms of what I do, how I think about this, first it starts with discovery. So what's that critical pain point that you need to solve, and how do you address it? Then you go into development, which is how do I design and validate this program? Then you need to think about launch, which isn't just saying, hey, this thing's available. It's also about driving adoption. And then you need to iterate. And so for the rest of this session, I'm going to get pretty tactical and talk about some of the things I did. I'll move quickly. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask at the end. If not, we can definitely connect after the fact. But I'm somebody who, when I come to these things, like I want to see some of those tactics. And so again, feel free to ask any questions at the end. So discovery. So one of the first things that I did is kind of figure out, like, what does the scope of my discovery look like? Obviously, you want to start with some business context and data. What is our mission, vision, values, right? When I joined, we were all marching towards Vision 2020, and it's really weird to be standing here and it's now 2020. I also looked at sales context and data. So what is the sales organization trying to achieve? What's this new process? What is historical performance? What is the gap that we have in terms of getting to the performance that we need this year? I looked at surveys. So we actually set up surveys to our sales organization to kind of figure out what their satisfaction was and dig a little deeper. And then I also looked at some of the surveys we had existing, like product NPS, to kind of figure out how they were experiencing our product. And then win-loss surveys as well to figure out how they're experiencing the sales cycle. Interviews were something that were really critical for me. So I looked at some of our sales performance data, and I actually just went to sales leaders and I said, hey, can you tell me who the top, average, and low performers are on your team? Because I want to talk to them. And I went out and I sat down with these people to figure out what was working, what wasn't working. And that was really critical for me to build trust with these people face to face. And what was even better to build trust was actually getting on and shadowing sales calls. So this is something I already do as a product marketer. Like, I need to hear from the customer what's going on, in order to kind of do my job. And so, what was fun about this is I'm sitting there kind of getting all this customer insight. And, the classic case is like, you talk to a sales rep and you're like, hey, did that thing work? And they're like, no, it didn't work. And you're like, okay, why didn't it work? And they're like, the customer didn't like it. And you're like, what didn't they like? Or what didn't it hit? And they can't tell you. And so what was fun about this was to be able to be on the call, and if something didn't hit the mark, after the fact, we'd kind of follow up and I'd be like, oh yeah, I totally get what you're saying. Like, they're not seeing this, this, and this. And they're like, yeah, see, I told you, like, they don't get it. And it built a lot of trust. So that face-to-face or computer-to-computer contact, and really just kind of diving in with sales reps was super helpful. And again, this was qualitative and quantitative. Like, there was some data that we have, and other times we kind of just had to make a call and go with it. So within that discovery, obviously I talked about the macro context again, which was like high growth, everything was new. In terms of the sales org, again, everything was new and nothing was the same. But I also wanted to dig a little bit deeper from a micro perspective. So I wanted to understand, like, who are the personas we're solving for? Like, as a product marketer, that's where my brain goes, right? Who is this customer? What are they doing? What do they need? What's their problem? And we kind of, we split it out into like the sales buyer personas and then the influencer personas. We're going out there and we're coaching our sales team to understand who is the decision maker, who is that sphere of influence. And I needed to do that same thing, in terms of, sales. And so a couple examples of that is we had a ton of new global enterprise sellers who had 15, 20-year track records in selling tech. So they had all the sales skills, but they were new to our organization. So they really need to understand the specific context of our organization. Versus we had a lot of legacy small business and commercial sellers because we grew B2C to B2B to B2B enterprise. And they understood our product, but they understood it from a very narrow kind of transactional lens. And so we had to get them up to speed on some of the value-based selling skills in the context of our platform. And then influencer personas. At the time, we considered our sales leaders influencers. It's cool to stand up here 3 years later. And we actually have sales enablement leaders for our sales leaders. So they work with them to make sure the leaders have what they need. But at the time, we considered them influencers. They were actually going to have to help us drive adoption. Sales supporting roles we also looked at. So I wanted to understand what their motivations were. For example, somebody in sales ops, like, they're highly motivated to make sure a seller knows, like, how do you enter a deal into Salesforce? How do you track that? How do you forecast? Understanding their pain points and their motivations, because I need to get them on board. And then cross-functional teams. A couple examples there was like our product team was going directly to our sales team to get access to customers and to train them, and they don't really know how to talk to salespeople and get what they need and triage that. Another example was our creative team. We have a really amazing in-house creative team, and sales reps were going directly to them to request assets. Huge bottleneck on our creative team because they don't know how to prioritize. Like, the sales rep's telling me he needs 20 things. Like, he can't possibly need 20 things, but I don't have the wherewithal to tell him what he does and doesn't need. I created these personas in the same way that any product marketer would, like, what's your goals, problems, needs, what is your responsibilities? And so I kind of use that as a basis. And then, being the product marketer that I am, I wanted to identify some core themes. So for me, it was really critical to communicate back to my leadership and then all of our cross-functional partners of what is this program going to be, right? Like, I don't want you to think I'm coming in to solve everything. There's some really specific core themes that I need to tackle. And for us, that was accessibility and ease of use. So our sales reps felt like they couldn't find anything, and what they could find was just like they had no idea how to use it. So we needed a tool that would facilitate that in a program. Consistency and standardization. Again, we're going into this new enterprise market. We need everyone to be singing the same song. And so that was really critical, and consistent behaviors. Relevancy and personalization. So as much as we talk about like right content, right buyer, right time, for me, it was right content, right salesperson, right time. But they also, there is this consistency we need to drive, but we also need to allow them to tailor things, right? Like not every customer is the same. There's certain things that should be flexible, and there's certain things that, quite frankly, shouldn't be flexible. And then the last thing was insights and action. So like I need data, whether that's like Mr. Sales Rep telling me something or actual data on how this drove a deal, so that I could go take action. So then, with this kind of discovery and having that communicated out to everyone, I went into development of this program. And the first, I kind of think about a few things here, which is content, tools and process, training and comms, and metrics. And so starting with content, this was the easiest place for me to start, because the biggest problem that was identified by the marketing team was like, we've created all this content for sales. We have no idea what exists, and we need to figure this out. So I went in and I sat down and I figured out, okay, what exists today? Like what's working well, what's not working well? And that was purely anecdotally. I made sure all the messaging was updated on that. We aligned it to the buyer's journey, and then any of the gaps that we have, we figured out what content we needed to create. And then we worked to close those gaps, which I'll talk about a little bit about in terms of the content pipeline in a minute. But then I thought about delivery. And this was something that was pretty interesting for me, because I was just in the other room, and Director of Product Marketing from HighSpot was speaking about how sales and marketing folks think differently. And so when I first tried to kind of organize information, I was like, oh yeah, buyer's journey, totally, I'll organize this. So I had content organized by like top of funnel, middle funnel, bottom of funnel. And I went to a sales rep and I was like, okay, cool. Like, what do you think about this? And he was like, no, like we have a sales process. Like I need stage 1, I need stage 2, stage 3. And so thinking about the delivery and how is this going to fit into a seller's workflow is really critical. And then the other thing I thought about was, again, what needs to be static and what needs to be dynamic. So that was kind of the content piece. So we got to a good place where we felt like we had all of the content, and we knew what we needed to create. And that's when we decided to choose a tool. Like we knew we had the basis of what we needed in terms of getting started. And so going back to those core themes, we wanted something that was accessible via our CRM. We needed something that would give us a one-stop shop for all content that sales needed. We needed something that would give us relevant content targeting. So not only to the sales rep, to the sales rep, so they could get the right information to buyers. And then we needed insights on content usage. That was kind of our MVP we were asking for. And as a result, we ended up choosing Seismic. And then I created process around this. So it's one thing to choose a tool. I had no idea how much process would actually go into this. And I felt like I had to bit off a little bit more than I can chew. But it turned out really well. So one thing was a content pipeline, as I mentioned. We had identified all this content that needed to be updated, and we'd identified all this content that needed to be created. And so I had to work with we had an in-house creative team. Maybe you would have somebody, an agency or something, but I actually had to figure out of like, how do we get content requests to them? How do we get the right things created? How do we test that? How do we get it into the platform? How do we update it? So that was something that, was really critical. Another thing was communication. There was so much noise to our sales team. They were spending most of their time on like non-core activities. Like most of their time was spent, how do I actually figure out what tool I'm supposed to use? I don't even know. How do I even figure out where to go for product updates? And we wanted to focus their time back on more of those core selling activities. So one of the things I did was I sat down and I evaluated all the information coming to them, right? Like product updates on how to use Salesforce, whatever it is. To do that, I just went back through Slack channels. We have Slack, and I just looked at that and went back through all the emails sent to like our sales alias. So once I kind of have a good feel, I kind of bucketed out like the different categories. We prioritize those by urgency and relevance. So who actually needs this information? A product update can take many different forms, and an AE probably just needs to know the high level value and a little bit of how it works. A CSM probably needs that link to documentation on, the nitty gritty of how to drive adoption. So really prioritizing out who needs what and the channel that we were going to distribute it through. It was really simple of just like a cleanup of Slack and a cleanup of the way we emailed them. So it was really, really just baseline at this point. The last thing we did is set up a feedback system. So again, the critical thing for me was like, I knew I just had to build something and then work on it and iterate. And so we set up those content analytics that I talked about. We continued surveying, interviewing, and shadowing sales. And then something super simple, which actually was really helpful for us, is we just created a Google form that sales reps could just put feedback in. Not every sales rep uses it. Like, we know that to be a fact. But there was those really, there were those people who engaged with it, and it just created an open channel. Honestly, the biggest feedback system I had is I just told every rep, like, hey, just Slack me. Just let me know what it is. I may not be able to respond to you immediately, but know that, like, I've got your information and I'm going to go with it. To be honest, it took up a lot of my time when we first started, but it was so worth it. Then I implemented it, which was just a lot of project management skills, and I'm just going to keep going because I don't want to relive that. So then I had to document the process. That's one thing I'll say is, like, I am somebody who's huge on documentation. It's just the way my brain works. I know a lot of people aren't huge on documentation because they think it slows things down, or, you know, you just got to move fast and blah, 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 like startup lingo, whatever you want to say. Like, we weren't a startup at this time. Some people kind of thought we were. So I just documented everything. And that was not just for sales. I'll go into a little bit more about like that process of training them, but for those internal stakeholders that were helping us to drive adoption, we needed to help them understand like what that was and give them one place. And since I was owning this, I needed to make sure everyone understood. So I created kind of like a dossier. And then I also created a checklist that was used by my team in sales training anytime they wanted to launch a program or an asset. And so we tiered it out like a product launch. It was like, tier 1, you're going to go through these channels, you're going to do these things, these people need to be involved, tier 2 all the way down to tier 4. And the goal was to improve efficiency. So any sales enablement member or any product marketing team member could come in and say, hey, I know I need to launch this pricing one sheet, like that's a tier 2, here's what I do. So really just making sure people understood that so I could kind of alleviate some of the time I was spending on this. Another thing we did in this stage was we created a charter with our sales training and productivity team. You know, I'll be the first one to say, like, it's never perfect. Sometimes our jobs still overlapped, but we were running into a lot of problems where we would create an asset and that was supposed to be what was shipped to sales. And then we would see what was shipped to sales and it was like modified. And it was kind of like, why did you do that? You know, there's obviously a reason it wasn't working. Let's talk about it. So creating this kind of formal charter really helped us get specific about who was doing what. This has evolved over time as we have a more formal enablement function now, but this was kind of the V1. Then we went to training and comms. So as I mentioned, for our influencers, one of the things we did with sales leaders is we helped them understand how to tie engagement to performance. So we would send them reports on content usage at this point, and we would say, hey, you know, here's the data, right? And it's your job to use this to dig in and to coach your team. So if you have a team member who keeps losing deals to the competition and they've never opened a competitive battle card in their life, like, that's a really great place to start. So just helping them understand how to actually use those analytics in their role. In terms of sales support and cross-functional, it was exactly like I talked about documentation on that process. Like, we needed them to help us. So the biggest thing we did at first was just driving the right behavior change of getting sales to go to Seismic. We kind of had a running joke at our company of like, anytime a salesperson asked for something on Slack, somebody would respond like, have you checked Seismic? Or like, we wouldn't send them a link. We'd be like, go into Seismic and search these keywords and you will find what you're looking for. It is the first result. It was all about like, at first we would send them links and then it just didn't change anything and it was incredibly frustrating. So we had the company get behind this one behavior change of just go to Seismic. Just go there and you'll see that it's there. And so I had influencers trained on, hey, if you need to communicate with sales, send this to me. I'll get it up within an hour and then you can communicate it out to sales. In terms of sales, we kind of did a push and pull model. So in terms of a push model, we created a watering hole. At this point, it was just like a Slack channel. We created a couple different ones with specific instances. We also did a self-service training video. So I had those all available on the tool so people could use. And then I spent about a month and a half just going to every single meeting that I could. And then the meeting cadence got, less over time. But I set up office hours. I had one-on-one time for anyone with questions. I did team meetings. I went into sales onboarding. Like, I was just everywhere they were. So they understood, like, hey, like, it's not just a tool. There's a person behind this tool. And if you need something, I'm here to help. Again, this took up a good amount of time, but it was really critical in getting people on board. One of the things I'll say about the way that I ran the trainings, and this is where it was really incredibly helpful to partner with somebody on the sales training side at the time, was understanding how to run these trainings. And so I started every training with like a what's in it for you, right? For an account executive, close more deals, close bigger deals. For a CSM, you need to drive customer engagement. And then I took them through a demo of the tool in the context of their workflow. So like the way that I would demo a product is very similar, right? I want this buyer to understand what the pain point is and how they're supposed to use this every day, every week, whatever. And so that's how I train sales. And so I'd say, hey, Mr. Account Executive, imagine you just got a new lead from your sales development representative. You can come into Seismic and see a persona PDF that's going to help you understand this person. And once you're ready to dive into discovery, we have discovery questions. If you land a meeting, here's a pitch deck. And when you get to proposal, here's a proposal. So like I would just take them through this flow and this context so they could see it wasn't just this library of information, it was actually a tool that they should be using every day. And then some of the metrics we were looking at was we were tracking deal size over time. So we're trying to go in this enterprise space. Is that deal size going up, and is average price per license increasing? Are we able to look into attribution of what we're doing and how it's impacting that? I'll talk a little bit more. And then sales NPS, how satisfied are our sellers? We continue doing those surveys and making sure that they were happy because they are our customers. One of the things that I did, this is the program. One of the things that I did is I tested and I validated all this before I ever launched it. So those interviews that I did with those kind of high, medium, low performers, I considered that my beta group of customers, and I ran like a month-long beta with them where I would say, hey, can you use this on your calls? Use this with customers. Like, let's get some feedback. We just did some really easy focus groups to make sure that it was right. And that's where we learned, like, hey, don't align it to top, middle, bottom of funnel, align it to sales stage. Like, that probably seems really obvious to a lot of people in this room, but it was new for me. And there was just some really great insights that we saw in terms of like how we were communicating with people and things like that. So we tested it with those people before we ever launched. And then we went into launch, and I'll probably spend the least amount of time on this. If you have a product marketer in your organization and you're close with them, like, that this is a great area to partner even further. If you do have product marketers in your organization who maybe there isn't a lot of trust there, you don't work together well, whatever it is, like, this is a really cool area where you can start to collaborate with them. And product marketers love to talk about launch. I don't know if you've noticed. So you can definitely partner with them. If you are a product marketer, I would say that this is a really great opportunity to bring your expertise around how a launch should function, and they can help you with the deep knowledge that they have around sales enablement. A couple of things that I will say in terms of launch is make sure you have some sort of like checklist that's keeping everyone grounded and on the same page. Make sure you're launching it to specifically target those different personas that we talked about, right? Buyers versus influencers. And the other thing I would say is make sure you have some sort of success stories. Like, I would never go in and launch a product without having some sort of customer validation that it works. So for every kind of launch that we do, we try to have a seller who's used it internally, willing to talk about what they used it for and how successful it was. So in terms of results of all this work, we were able to get 90% adoption of the tool and 60% daily active users with a super high NPS. There's a lot of little screenshots up here. You don't need to read them, just humble brag. But one of the biggest things that helped us do this was a proposal tool. So during discovery, we uncovered, hey, we only have a quote sheet. We don't have any full proposal. And we created this really cool tool in Seismic. It's the number one used asset, and it helped us close the biggest deal in company history at the time. So that was really incredible. And then we just continued to get some really great feedback. People felt like we were always there when we need them. Deal size was going up. It was a really awesome experience to put all this work into it and see some really awesome results. Then I need to iterate, right? I need to look at all the data that we have and figure out what to do. So here were kind of some of the short-term pivots we did and long-term pivots. In terms of short-term pivots, one of the things I learned about and I think is helpful for product marketers to understand, is the difference between enablement readiness and sales readiness. Our enablement was like ready to go. Like we had all the tools, all the assets, all the market context you could possibly want. We built process content, whatever. But there was a gap in terms of sales readiness. So like some of the sellers just didn't have the basic skills that they needed to do this. And that's not really in our domain, but we can help drive some of that. And so one of the things that I did is we launched this kind of cloud initiative last year. It was like a solution selling effort to say, hey, with Pluralsight, you can migrate to the cloud faster, right? Migrate from on-prem to the cloud. I created this enablement deck that would kind of call out the key assets and tools, but I didn't just ship this deck. I actually went into team meetings, and one of the biggest helps for them is our pitch decks do a lot of, market problem, thought leadership up front, and then the solution selling later on. I sat down with them and I took them slide by slide. And I'm like, this is the research we did. This is why it's important. We use this with customers. Here's what they said. Another seller used this. Here's what it is. This is the intent of this slide, because some of our sellers just didn't have those storytelling skills and those pitching skills. And so just sitting down and having them hear it from me how I would pitch was one thing, but then also having those customer examples and seller examples was really important. Another thing we had to do is pivot on how we got metrics. And so one of the things we thought we were going to be able to get was content usage straight to attribution. We had some pretty gnarly attribution model problems. And so we had to kind of figure out a way to kind of close the gap there. And so we had an extra step. We looked at who was using the content. We knew who top, medium, low performers were, right? We would use that with interviews and NPS. So I could go in and say, hey, Mr. Sales Rep, who's doing really well and just closed this, $1 million deal. I see that you used all this content in the last X months. Can we talk about what you used, how the customer responded? Was it successful? And so we would do deal reviews, and we would just use basic content analytics. And the reason that I bring this up is a lot of the times this is really hard. Data quality is not great. You don't have the resources to stand this up. As long as you can get something that's going to tell you who's using what, you can go do that digging. And if you have a team of people, you can all just take a couple interviews and go work that. So, it can be qualitative as well. One last thing I'll talk about is a long-term pivot in terms of our event enablement. So we had set up this program. It was kind of running for a year in terms of product marketing, working with sales enablement. And our event team influencers, I'll call our events marketing team, came to us and they said, we need help. So the context on that was we have two now, but at the time only one user conference. And it was brand new to the company. It was the second year that we had it. And that year we were asking our sellers to sell a quota of tickets. And it was really, really new for a lot of people. And a lot of the context was I don't understand why this is important to me. I don't care about selling tickets to a marketing event. I need to focus on what I'm doing. I don't really understand why a customer would want to come. And I don't even have what I need to do this. There were some teams in the organization that were doing this really well. There were sales leaders who got it and they had their teams running their own programs, but nobody else knew about that. So one of the things that I did was, in terms of development, was reframing the why and then closing some of those gaps. So, these are kind of small. The details aren't important. One of the things we did was, hey, the reason you should care about selling these tickets, what's in it for you is that, did you know that if you invite somebody to Pluralsight Live, on average, deal size is 3 times larger? Did you know that 5 out of the top 7 performers, on the sales side who went to club got people to Pluralsight Live? Did you know this many dollars closed after, right? So it was why do you actually need to sell tickets to this and positioning to that? We also closed those content gaps. So they had been asking for, I need a personalized invite. I need an agenda that speaks to the value. And we train them on that value. Don't just tell somebody to come talk to, see our keynote speaker in the band. Really talk about why a customer or prospect is going to get value out of this event. So that was one of the things we did. And the other thing is we created a playbook. It was about 10 slides, and there was a pre-ticket sale and a post-ticket sale playbook that took them through kind of all the actions and context they needed, from who to target, reports to target with them with, all of that good stuff. I know there are a lot of sales reps who will not read 10 slides, so I created a too long, don't read checklist, which had every step and kind of linked out. And this was really helpful to kind of give them that guidance on what they needed to do pre and post-ticket sale. Then we launched it. I used that kind of similar model of evangelizing in meetings and having self-service. I did monthly videos. It was just me in my house, in my office, like with iMovie, where I would cover event updates. I had like a sales scoreboard for most ticket sales. I also would just do simple event updates, and then like, what is your focus this year? And what are the resources, or this month, and the resources you should use? Our field marketing team drives a lot of this, so I partner with them, and they evangelize a lot of this, and also sales leaders as well. Okay, cool. So that was a lot of information, but I like to give a lot of information. That's just my style. So what are the key takeaways I want to leave you with today? One, treat sales like your customer. This was something that just like, as a product marketer, as soon as I started thinking about that, it clicked. Like I treated Seismic like the product that I was building, and I was the product manager who was like trying to figure out like, how do I develop this thing? And then like the next day I'm the product marketer, is like, how do I market this thing? And then the next day I'm like, okay, I'm the enabler. How do I enable this thing? So that was really helpful. Realizing that if you have a go-to-market team or you have some sort of go-to-market skills, like it was really incredibly helpful for me to get there, to use those to get to where I needed to be. And the last thing is like, just try something. Like I know, I moved from a really small organization to a really big organization, but what was critical for me was like, I just needed to do something. And I was so scared that if I built something that didn't work, the sellers would never come back. And they did. Like they were like, hey, this didn't really work, but we appreciate all the work. We think if you made a couple tweaks, like it'll be great. And I'm like, oh yeah. So just having some sort of process that everyone can understand and that helps you move through, was really critical. And that's my time today. Thank you all for joining. Appreciate it.